About 5 years ago, my second-born, Jeremiah, and I were standing on the porch of Bobby Caldwell's home in Winsboro, South Carolina. And we watched as a storm rolled in and out across the fields in the country locale that we were. We could see this beautiful rainbow. In fact, it was a portion of it even was a double rainbow. And I remember draping my arm across Jeremiah's shoulder and saying, "Do you know what that means?" And he said, "Sure, it means God will never flood the earth again." And certainly every time we see a rainbow, that's exactly what we think. And we know that to be fact from Scripture. And we're going to go look at that Scripture in just a minute in Genesis chapter 9. But I want to talk for 2 seconds about a rainbow. My father was a bush pilot in South America. We were missionaries. We lived in Colombia. And one thing that he relayed to me, I don't remember ever seeing it personally from the air, but he relayed to me something that's very interesting about a rainbow. When a rainbow is seen from the air, the viewer's shadow, or the shadow of the airplane in his case, was right in the center of the rainbow. And the rainbow itself was a circle. When viewed from the air, a rainbow is a circle. What's interesting is from the perspective of the person on the ground, they are looking at it from the center of the circle, and the circle plays out around each individual viewer. And so for each viewer, the location of the circle is a little bit different, just shifted a tiny bit. But an interesting parallel that we're not really going to dig into right now in dealing with this covenant that God makes with man and his sign in the heavens, the rainbow, is the fact that God's shadow is upon the one that views the rainbow. And it leads me to think of Psalm 91, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty." We're not going to go there. What we want to do is we want to look at this passage of Scripture. We want to consider rainbows, and we want to consider covenant, and we want to consider sanctification. And so if we go to Genesis chapter 9, verses, I think it's probably about 8 through, or Genesis chapter 9, verses 9 through 17, we find a passage of Scripture relaying the story of Noah and the rainbow, how it came to be. There's some very interesting pieces or words or phrases in this passage that we really need to key in on. He tells us first off that this is my bow. My bow. And looking here at eSword, we can see that the bow, the word kesheth, specifically speaks of rainbow, or it could also be a bow for hunting or that sort of thing. But I think it's important that we note that the Father tells us it is my bow. Secondly, I want to point out to you the word token. In Genesis chapter 9, verse 12, and God said, "This is the token," or the sign of the covenant, "which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations." The word token here is ot, and it means sign. It could be a distinguishing mark. It is also a miraculous, it can be a banner. I want us to focus in on what this sign is. Further, I want you to notice that the sign is between me, Yehovah, God, and you. Okay, it's between God and, in this case, every living creature as well. It tells us elsewhere, kol basar, all flesh. But specifically, it's between God and man, and it's a sign. Also notice here that it says, "Neither shall there be any more flood to destroy the earth." The purpose of the sign is to give us a specific promise. And the specific promise is that God will never, ever flood the earth or destroy the earth again by water or with a flood. We may have local floods, but it will never again be a global flood. The last thing I'd like you to notice in this passage is multiple times we're told perpetual generations, an everlasting covenant. The word there that we have is olam. Olam from Brown Driver Briggs means long duration, forever, ever, everlasting, evermore, perpetual, forever and always, everlasting, indefinite or unending future. It's a word that expresses an extremely long amount of time. It has no shortness to it. It's Olam. And we're told that this is an everlasting covenant. Well, I know when I read this passage of Scripture, something fascinating happens in my head because it causes fireworks to go off. It reminds me of another passage that is exactly like this passage, using exactly the same language. And this is fascinating. Let's go to Exodus chapter 31, and let's take a look at what Exodus 31 verse 12 through 17. And this is where the Lord speaks to Moses, and he says, "Speak unto the children of Israel, and say, Verily, my Sabbaths," just like my bow. He says, "My Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign," or a token, or an ensign, or a mark, a distinguishing mark. "It is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yehovah that doth sanctify you." Notice right here that every single one of those elements that we saw in the other passage appears in one verse, but it all happens again just a couple verses later. And so we're going to look at this. He says, "It's my Sabbaths. It is a sign that is between me and you, and it is throughout your generations, and it is for the purpose of reminding him and us that he sanctifies us. Just as the rainbow reminds him that he will never flood the earth again by water or destroy the earth again by water, the Sabbath, the Shabbat, the seventh-day Shabbat is a reminder to him that he sanctifies us, and it is a mark on his people." If we read on through this passage, we get down to verse 16 and 17, and again, these elements are all expressed to us with an additional element. It says, "Therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Shabbat, to observe the Shabbat throughout their generations, for a perpetual Olam covenant, forever. It is a sign, a token, right, between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yehovah made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." Now what I want to do is I want to put up a quick graphic here that you can see, where you can see that all of these are together in one place. Or both of these passages are in one place, and I want to see all the lines connecting and demonstrating that these are parallel passages. You see here, "my bow and my Sabbaths," and you see perpetual generations and throughout your generations. And we see token between me and you, and sign between me and you, or between me and the children of Israel. And we see everlasting covenant and perpetual covenant. And then we see what it promises. It promises never to destroy the earth again by water, and promises that the Lord would sanctify. Now I have a question. Why is it that in Christendom we believe that the earth will never be destroyed by water again? I don't know anybody building an ark these days. And yet we say that an identical passage laid out exactly the same way in identical language, we say, oh, that's been done away with. That's a question. If we look at the end of the Exodus 31 passage, verse 17, it tells us it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. If you believe that you, through the Messiah, are grafted into the commonwealth of Israel, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13 or 14, somewhere right in there, if you believe that you are grafted into Israel and you're part of Israel, then you should be keeping his forever sign that he says never ever changes. And he tells us no less than 9 times in the Torah and multiple times in other places in Scripture, references below, that you need to be keeping the Shabbat. And that's evidence of his work in your life. Are you building an ark? or are you keeping the Sabbath? Shalom.